The second hand made a sound like a fingernail on glass. Soft, repetitive, impossible to ignore once you noticed it. Tick, tick, tick. Someone had taped the clock to the bulkhead to stop it from sliding with the vibration. The tape had yellowed at the edges. One corner kept lifting, curling away as if it wanted to escape the wall, and every few seconds the loose edge fluttered in the draft, like a small flag surrendering. A man sat beneath it with his cap pushed back. Not asleep, not awake in any useful way. His boot heel tapped the deck in the same rhythm for a while, then drifted off beat, then found the rhythm again. Across from him, another man held a pencil over a folded sheet of paper, and kept lowering the pencil tip to the page without writing anything. The graphite made tiny gray moons where it touched and lifted, as if the paper were being tested for softness. Somewhere above them, a door latch clicked, then clicked again, failing to fully catch. The sound repeated whenever the ship, or the building, or whatever held them, shifted slightly. Each time it clicked, the men looked up without moving their heads, just their eyes, a quick dart, a reflex. Each time it clicked, nothing followed. There was a smell that had been there long enough to feel permanent. Damp wool, old tobacco ground into fabric, metal that had been warmed by too many hands. Under it, a cleaner smell tried to exist, something sharp, like soap, but it never won. It only announced itself when someone moved, when cloth rubbed cloth, when a sleeve passed close enough for the air to stir. On the table between them sat a cup of tea that had gone cold. A skin had formed across the surface, thin and trembling. Every time the vibration deepened, the skin quivered like a living thing, and then settled again. No one drank it. No one moved it. It existed as proof that time was passing and being wasted. A third man stood by the narrow window, though there was nothing to see. The glass was dark and thick, smeared with condensation. He took a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped the same small circle again and again, clearing it, fogging it, clearing it, fogging it, never widening the circle. Through that clean spot was only darkness and the faintest suggestion of movement far away, like the... He tried the handle once, gently. Locked. He tried again, as if the lock might have changed its mind. Locked. He put his hand back in his pocket and stood very still, his shoulders squared as if he were being watched. Someone coughed in the corridor outside. Not the rough cough of illness. A careful cough. A cough meant to announce presence without committing to speech. Shoes passed. Slow, then stopped. A pause that stretched. A paper rustled. Then the shoes moved on. Inside the room, the pencil finally wrote something, one short word, and then stopped. The man stared at what he'd written as if it were an accusation. He erased it with his thumb, smearing the graphite, and folded the page tighter, creasing it along an old fold as if reusing a wound. Tick, tick. The man beneath the clock shifted his weight and the chair complained, a dry wooden He reached for his cap, lifted it, set it back down. A meaningless correction. A ritual. His fingers lingered at the brim, as if he could hold the moment in place by holding that. A radio somewhere nearby. Another room, another level, hissed softly. Not a message, not music, just the thin animal sound of an open channel waiting to be filled. Every now and then the hiss changed pitch, as if a distant hand brushed the dial, as if someone far away had almost decided to speak. The men listened to it without looking. Listening without acknowledging was its own kind of discipline. A drip started in the corner, steady at first, then irregular. Drip, pause, drip, drip, pause. The sound was so small it became enormous in the quiet. The standing man glanced at it once, and for a moment his mouth tightened, the faintest sign of irritation. Then he let it go, as if even annoyance required energy they couldn't afford. The air felt held, not heavy, not thick, held, like breath being saved. A hand ran along a pocket seam. A ring was turned on a finger. A thumb traced the edge of a button. The smallest motions, repeated, 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 until they no longer looked like habits and began to look like prayers. No one asked what time it was. The clock was right there, loud as a heartbeat. Asking would have made the waiting real in a way it wasn't yet. The latch clicked again. This time it clicked and stayed. All three men heard it. All three did not move. Their eyes shifted, and for a beat there was nothing else in the room but that tiny change. The difference between a door that refused to settle and a door that finally had. Then, somewhere far off, a sound rose that didn't belong to the room. A long, distant mechanical note, steady and thinning, like an engine being brought up carefully, like power being gathered without hurry. The standing man lowered his handkerchief. The seated man stopped tapping his heel. The pencil hovered over blank paper again, perfectly still. Tick, tick. Whatever they were waiting for had not arrived, but the room had begun to count down Morning light reached the corridor in thin, reluctant strips, as if the sun itself had been told to keep its voice down. The room they'd been sitting in did not change when the day began. The air stayed the same held air. The cold tea stayed cold. The tape on the clock stayed curled. But outside, beyond the narrow window and the latched door, routine started up with the careful insistence of men who needed routine to prove they were still in control of something. The corridor filled with footsteps that tried not to sound hurried. Boots met metal, met wood, met metal again, depending on which section you were in. Every surface gave a different answer. Somewhere nearby, a kettle sang, and then stopped abruptly, as if someone had covered it with a hand. A short burst of laughter rose from a group farther down and died too quickly, like a match struck in wind. The standing man finally left the window. He did it without a sigh, without the small theatrics of relief. He simply moved, as if motion had been scheduled, and he was obeying it. He opened the door with 2 fingers, just enough to look out. The corridor was busy, but busy in a way that pretended not to be. Men passed with folders tucked against their ribs. A runner, young, cheeks flushed, moved through them and didn't apologize, only lowered his head and kept going. No one looked directly into the room. They glanced, slid their eyes away, carried on. Still nothing, the standing man said, though no one had asked. The one with the pencil nodded once. His page was blank now, the erasure smudges making it look bruised. He folded it again, not in half this time, but in thirds, as if changing the fold might change the day. A bell sounded somewhere deeper in the structure. Not an alarm, not the sharp, panicked bell of fire or attack, a practical bell. A bell that belonged to schedules. It rang twice and stopped. The men responded to it without speaking. Chairs scraped lightly. A sleeve was pulled down. A collar adjusted. The cap under the clock was finally put on properly and then taken off again. The man reconsidering whether it was the moment for. He chose to leave it off, as if bareheadedness could pass for calm. They moved into the corridor and became part of the building's pulse. The corridor smelled different than the room. More fuel, less damp wool. The faint, sour edge of sweat dried over. The air was warmer here, warmed by bodies and machinery, and the steady work of being ready. On the way, they passed a narrow door left open. Inside, a man leaned over a map table under a shaded lamp, its light pooling like water on paper. Hands hovered above the map but did not touch it. A pencil lay unused. A cigarette burned in an ashtray to an absurd length, the ash growing heavy and fragile, ready to fall. No one flicked it. Above the map, a line of pins held up a list of times and names. Someone had drawn a thin red line through one of the entries, not crossed out completely, just marked, as if to say, noted. A radio operator sat nearby with headphones pressed hard to his ears, one hand cupping them tighter, listening for something that kept refusing to be. His gaze was fixed on a point in the air rather than on his instruments. The way a person looks when listening becomes imagining. The hiss from the open channel filled the room like rain. The standing man paused, watching the operator for a second. The operator did not look up. The standing man did not ask. In a place like this, questions were a kind of weight. You added them carefully. They continued. The corridor opened into a larger passage where men stepped aside automatically for those carrying crates. The crates were unmarked except for numbers stenciled in black. The numbers meant something, but not to the men who made room. The men who made room only knew the rule. Let them pass. A door opened ahead, releasing a breath of outside air. It carried salt and something sharp, like paint or cordite, or the memory of cordite, stored in the walls and in the seams of clothing. For a moment, the hallway's warmth broke, replaced by a clean cold that made the skin tighten. Someone's voice floated in from the open door. Should be fine, he said, and the way he said it had nothing to do with certainty. It was the voice of someone repeating what was expected. Another voice answered. They'll see reason. A third voice laughed softly, not mockingly, but as if laughing made the sentence easier to carry. They always do. The men walking heard it. They did not react. Optimism was everywhere, laid on top of anxiety like a thin blanket. If you pulled it away, you'd feel what was underneath, so no one pulled. Beyond that door, the world continued, as if it hadn't been told it was nearing an edge. Somewhere outside, men were eating from tin bowls. Someone was shaving with a dull razor, dragging it carefully across his jaw, pausing to wipe it, dragging again. A line of laundry fluttered between 2 posts, socks and undershirts moving in the wind with an almost cheerful persistence. The small domestic shapes looked wrong against the hard geometry of equipment and steel. A truck engine coughed, caught, and settled into a steady rumble. The sound was comforting in its predictability. It was the sound of something obeying. A mechanic lay on his back beneath a vehicle, tapping with a wrench in a steady pattern. Tap, tap, pause, then repeating it, as if the metal would reveal its secrets if asked politely enough times. A man nearby rolled a cigarette with practiced fingers, licking the seam, smoothing it, lighting it, inhaling with his eyes half closed. Time stretched across these actions like a thin film. Everything was taking longer than it should, not because anyone was slow, but because waiting was now part of every task. Men checked bolts twice, counted crates again, read the same line of a message twice before passing it on. These were not mistakes. These were delays disguised as diligence. In a narrow office along the passage, a clerk stamped papers with methodical care. Stamp. Lift. Align. Stamp. Each stamp was final in a small way, a decision sealed without drama. He wiped the stamp pad once with a cloth, then kept stamping, as if cleanliness could be a form of safety. On the wall behind him, a calendar hung open to a month no one had bothered to turn. The days were crossed out in pencil, a steady chain of marks. Today's square was still blank. The man with the pencil, who had been quiet, stopped near the office doorway and watched the clerk's hand for a moment. The stamping looked like reassurance. The clerk did not look up. He didn't need to. The stamping was for everyone. At the far end of the corridor, a figure appeared and made the whole passage shift without anyone saying so. He wasn't taller than the others. He didn't move faster, but he carried a folder under his arm the way a priest carries a book. Careful, protected, treated as if it contained the weight of all the air in the building. Men stepped aside. Conversations lowered. Even the truck outside seemed to rumble more quietly, though it did not change. The figure walked past without stopping, eyes forward, the folder pressed to his ribs. He did not acknowledge anyone, and no one demanded acknowledgement. If he looked at you, you might become part of whatever was inside that folder. Better to remain unseen. After he passed, the corridor exhaled in tiny waves. Shoulders loosened. A man cleared his throat. Someone made a joke under his breath. It was the same sound as earlier laughter, brief, fragile, and not meant to last. The standing man turned his head slightly, tracking the folder with his eyes until it vanished around a corner. "It's moving," he said. The others didn't answer. They didn't need to. They could feel it. The slow, invisible machinery of a decision, assembling itself somewhere out of sight, gears turning without noise. They reached a small mess area where coffee was. The coffee smelled bitter and old. A man held out his cup. Another man poured without looking at him. The stream steady, practiced. The first man took a sip immediately and winced, then took another, as if teaching his mouth to accept it. The second man lit a cigarette and offered it without asking. The first man shook his head. "Not now," he said, and the words sounded like they were meant for more than the cigarette. Someone at the end of the table was reading a letter, lips moving silently. He folded it and put it away, then unfolded it and read it again, as if repetition could protect what the letter contained from whatever else was coming. A radio in the corner crackled, not with a message, but with the brief phantom of a syllable that didn't complete, a breath, a clipped edge of sound. Several heads turned at once, then turned away when nothing followed. The room returned to the murmur of cups and boots and paper. The pencil man sat down with his coffee and finally wrote something again. This time he wrote a time, just the numbers. He underlined them once, hard enough to dent the paper. The man under the clock, now without his cap, watched the underline and then stared at the calendar on the wall, at the blank square of today. He reached out and made a small mark in it, not an X, not a line through, just a dot, as if to say, "We are here." Outside, the wind picked up. Laundry snapped on the line. A loose signboard creaked against its mounting, once, twice, then settled into a steady knock. Knock, knock, knock. Each knock sounded like a small reminder. Not urgent, not dramatic, just persistent. The held air returned, even in this larger room. Men kept drinking, kept stamping, kept tightening bolts, kept speaking in a careful, even tone about things that were not the thing. A new sound joined the background, faint at first, then clearer as it approached. The measured beat of footsteps on the main stairwell, coming down in a steady cadence, as if whoever descended had decided there would be no hurry, not even now. The folder was coming back, and with it, the day was narrowing. Time, which had been stretched thin across routine, began to pull itself tighter, and still, nothing had happened. Not yet. By the time the first report arrived, it was already late enough in the day for men to start misjudging the hour by instinct. Light had shifted without anyone marking it. The narrow windows no longer gave clean illumination, only a dull, slanted glow that turned edges soft and faces unreadable. Shadows sat where they hadn't earlier, stretching in unfamiliar directions, as if the building itself had rotated slightly. The report did not arrive with urgency. It came folded, handed from one man to another, passed along with a nod and no accompanying words. Paper moved faster than voices now. Voices had learned to stay out of the way. The man who received it read it standing, then read it again sitting down, then placed it face down on the table, as if the words might leak through if left exposed. He did not summon anyone. He did not clear his throat. He reached for his cup instead and drank the last of the bitter coffee, making a face only after swallowing. Across the room, a radio operator adjusted his headphones, frowning slightly. The hiss was different. Not louder, not quieter, just uneven, like breath taken through teeth. He turned to dial a fraction. The hiss steadied. He nodded to himself, satisfied, and wrote a short note on the pad beside him. The note joined several others, all brief, all neat, all incomplete in a way that felt deliberate. A door opened somewhere above. Footsteps crossed the floor overhead, then stopped. A chair scraped. Paper shuffled. The sound suggested a meeting without ever becoming one. Down the corridor, a sentry leaned against the wall and shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He checked his watch, then checked it again, tapping the glass with his thumb as if the watch might be stuck. It wasn't. Time was behaving exactly as it should. That was part of the problem. A runner came through carrying a message pouch. He slowed as he entered the main passage, adjusting his pace to match the building's mood. He delivered the pouch, waited while it was opened, then waited some more while the contents were skimmed, not read. "You can go," someone finally said. The runner hesitated as if expecting more, then nodded and left, his footsteps quickening only after he turned the corner. In the map room, a pin had fallen out. No one had seen it happen. It lay on the floor near the table leg, a small bright thing against the dark surface. The map itself showed no obvious gap, no empty place that demanded correction. The fallen pin was noticed, eventually, by a man crossing the room. He bent, picked it up, and set it carefully on the table's edge. He did not reinsert it. The shaded lamp hummed faintly, the filament vibrating just enough to make the light tremble. The cigarette in the ashtray had burned itself out, leaving a crooked spine of ash collapsed onto the metal rim. No one replaced it. Someone pointed at a section of the map and said, "That should be fine." No one asked why. In a side room, a telephone rang once. It was not the sharp ring of an incoming call meant to be answered. It rang and stopped, as if the caller had changed his mind or the line had slipped. The man nearest the phone watched it for a moment, then turned back to his paperwork. He told himself it had been interference. Interference happened all the time. Outside, the wind shifted direction. Flags that had been hanging limp earlier began to pull and strain, snapping once, then settling into a restless motion. Dust lifted from the yard and moved in low, dragging lines across the ground. A mechanic wiped grit from his eyes and cursed softly, then went back to tightening a bolt that didn't need tightening. A truck stalled at the far gate. The engine sputtered, coughed, died. The driver leaned out, shouted something light-hearted about bad fuel. Laughter answered him. Someone fetched a tool. The hood was lifted. Hands disappeared into the machinery. The delay became communal, a shared inconvenience that gave everyone an excuse to stand still for a few extra minutes. While they waited, a man nearby glanced toward the horizon. He didn't know what he was looking for. He only knew the shape of the distance felt wrong. Too open, too quiet. He frowned, then shook his head and looked away. Distance had always looked like that. He had simply forgotten. Back inside, the man with the folded report unfolded it again. This time, he read every line. His face did not change. If anything, it smoothed, as if concentrating required a certain emptiness. He traced a sentence with his finger, once, then folded the paper more carefully than before, aligning the edges precisely. He slid it into the folder that had returned earlier and closed it. The folder grew thicker by the smallest amount. No one commented. The radio hiss rose and fell. A voice almost emerged, just the beginning of a consonant, cut off immediately. The operator leaned closer, heart lifting for a fraction of a second, then settling again when nothing followed. He wrote another note, shorter than the last. At a table near the wall, two men argued quietly over something minor, a count, a delivery time, a missing signature. The argument stayed polite. Each man gave ground easily, too easily, as if neither wanted the burden of being right. "It won't matter," one of them said, and meant it in the most ordinary way possible. A clerk stamped another form. The sound echoed once, sharper than before, then blended back into the room. Stamp, lift, a line. The calendar still showed a blank square. A pen hovered over it, hesitated, then was set down without marking anything. In the corridor, footsteps approached again, the same measured cadence from earlier. The sound passed by, paused, then continued on. A door closed softly, not a slam. A decision made without emphasis. Men resumed their routines with renewed focus, as if focus itself could serve as insulation. Cups were refilled, radios adjusted, notes rewritten more neatly. Every action became slightly more precise, slightly more careful. Precision felt like control. Somewhere far beyond the walls, something shifted that no instrument registered. No gauge moved, no bell rang. The air pressure changed by an amount too small to notice consciously. A man paused mid-sentence, frowned, then finished what he was saying anyway. Outside, the truck engine finally caught. The driver cheered. Someone clapped him on the shoulder. The vehicle rolled through the gate at last. Delay resolved, problem solved. The sense of relief spread easily. Inside, the fallen pin slid off the table's edge and hit the floor again. This time, no one noticed at all. The room felt smaller without changing its shape. No walls moved. No doors closed that hadn't already been closed. But the space between people narrowed, as if something invisible had leaned inward. Voices dropped another register. Even footsteps softened. The heel-to-toe rhythm careful now, measured, like counting. A clock somewhere chimed the hour. It wasn't the clock from earlier, the one taped to the wall, but a deeper sound, farther away, resonant enough to travel through the structure. One strike, then another, then another. Each one landed cleanly, unquestioned. No one checked a watch. The sound itself was enough. When the chime ended, it left behind a pocket of silence that nobody rushed to fill. The folder was opened again, not ceremonially, not with the gravity people imagined such moments deserved. It was opened the way a man opens a ledger he has already memorized. Pages were turned with the pads of fingers, careful not to crease them. Someone leaned in, close enough to read over a shoulder, close enough to smell ink and paper. A sentence was read aloud. Only one. It hung in the air, incomplete without context, without conclusion. The words themselves were ordinary. It was their placement that made them dangerous. Could be delayed, someone said quickly, as if offering the phrase up before anyone else could speak. A pause followed. Not disagreement, not agreement. Just the pause where an alternative briefly existed. Another man cleared his throat. Or it could hold. The way he said hold suggested stability, patience, the possibility that things might simply remain as they were for a little while longer. No one challenged them. Someone nodded. Someone else shrugged. The sentence dissolved into the room's background noise, absorbed without resistance. A chair scraped back. A man stood, walked to the window, and stopped. He didn't wipe the glass this time. He just looked through the condensation, accepting the blow. Outside, the light had thinned further. The sky was neither bright nor dark, suspended in that colorless stretch that made judging time difficult. From this angle, he could see men moving in the yard below, their actions purposeful, but unhurried. A crate was being carried from one place to another, then set down, then picked up again by someone else who seemed unsure where it was meant to go. No one appeared concerned by the confusion. It was treated as temporary, fixable. The man at the window rested his forehead briefly against the glass. Inside, a radio crackled more sharply than before. Everyone froze for half a second, just long enough to reveal that they had been waiting for it. The operator stiffened, fingers poised. A voice emerged this time, distorted but unmistakably human. A location, a number, then silence again. "Say again," the operator said into the microphone, too calmly. Nothing answered. He waited, adjusted the dial, waited longer. The hiss returned, steady and indifferent. The operator exhaled slowly through his nose and wrote something down. The note was longer this time. He underlined it once. No one asked what it said. In another room, a phone was lifted off its cradle and held without dialing. The man holding it listened to the dead line, as if expecting sound to form on its own. After a moment, he replaced the receiver carefully, aligning it just right. He did not try again. A meeting formed without anyone calling it one. Men gathered around the table, leaning in, hands braced on wood. Their faces were close enough now that expressions mattered. Lines around eyes tightened, jaws set, then relaxed. No one smiled. Someone pointed to a place on the map. Not the place everyone had been watching, but another nearby, less obvious. His finger hovered, then pulled back. "Still time," he said. The phrase passed through the group like a test. It wasn't challenged. It wasn't confirmed. Still time meant choice. Choice meant responsibility. A door opened at the far end of the room, and a messenger stepped in, hat in hand. He stopped just inside, waiting to be acknowledged. When he finally was, he crossed the floor and handed over a single sheet of paper. The paper was read, then read again by someone else. The messenger waited, eyes fixed on a spot above their heads. He did not fidget. He did not ask if there was a reply. "You can stand by," someone told him. He nodded and moved to the wall, becoming part of it. Outside, the wind died suddenly. The flags went slack. Dust settled. The abrupt stillness felt unnatural, as if the world had paused to listen. A man checked his watch at last. He didn't announce the time. He simply looked up, met another man's eyes, and nodded once. The nod carried more weight than words. Across the room, the calendar was finally marked. Not with a line or an X, but with a small, neat circle around the date. An act that suggested intention without specifying what that intention was. The pen was capped and set aside. The radio hiss softened, then sharpened again, cycling unpredictably. The operator leaned closer, jaw clenched. His hand hovered over the transmit switch, then fell back. "Not yet," he muttered, to no one. The men at the table began to disperse, not because anything had been decided, but because standing together too long made the moment feel heavier. They returned to their stations, their posts, their small domains of control. Routine resumed, thinner than before. A final report was placed on top of the folder, not inside it. For a moment, it sat there untouched. Then someone slid it under the cover and closed the folder completely. The sound it made was barely audible, but everyone heard it. Somewhere beyond the walls, something aligned itself into place. And though nothing had been ordered, nothing announced, the window where change could still slip through had begun to close. The change did not arrive as an interruption. It arrived as a correction, a small adjustment made quietly, without ceremony, as if someone had reached out and straightened a picture frame that had been hanging slightly crooked all day. In the communications room, the operator received a signal that did not demand attention. It came through cleanly, without distortion, without urgency. No raised voice, no repetition, just a confirmation, delivered in a tone that assumed it would be accepted. The operator wrote it down carefully. He checked the time. He checked the channel identifier. Everything matched. There was no reason to hesitate. He slid the note across the desk to the man beside him. The man read it once. Then he nodded. The note was placed into the folder without comment. That was all. No one stood. No one spoke. No one called for anyone else to come and see. The room did not tighten the way it had before. If anything, it relaxed. Just slightly, as if a question that had been floating in the air all day had finally settled on an answer. A man near the doorway adjusted his jacket and stepped aside to let someone pass. The someone passed without acknowledging him. Their shoulders brushed, lightly, accidentally. Neither apologized. In the corridor, a switch was flipped. Not a dramatic lever. Not a red handle behind glass. Just a small worn toggle on a panel that had been used countless times before. The man who flipped it did so without looking at his hand. Muscle memory guiding the motion. The panel hummed differently afterward. Not louder. Not faster. Simply differently. He noticed it, frowned for half a second, then moved on. Outside, a sentry was relieved of his post. He handed over his position with the usual exchange. Quiet words, a nod, a shared glance toward the distance. The new sentry took his place, feet planted in the same worn marks on the ground. The old sentry walked away without looking back. A routine rotation. Nothing more. In the map room, the pin that had fallen earlier was finally returned to the board, but not in its original place. It was set a finger's width away, close enough to seem the same, far enough to matter. The man who placed it stepped back and studied the map, head tilted. "That's better," he said. No one asked why. A clerk carried a stack of stamped papers from one desk to another. On the top sheet, a time had been altered by a single digit. The original number was still faintly visible beneath the ink, a ghost of what had been planned earlier. The clerk did not notice, or noticed, and decided it was not his role to question it. He delivered the stack and returned to his desk. The calendar on the wall was glanced at and ignored. The circled date remained unchanged, now oddly distant, as if it belonged to another version of the day. A door that had been kept ajar since morning was closed. It was done gently. The latch eased into place to avoid noise. But the effect was immediate. The corridor beyond it felt cut off, sealed away. Conversations on the other side became indistinct, reduced to murmurs without words. Inside the room, the air shifted again, not held this time, but committed. The radio hiss settled into a steady, predictable rhythm. The operator leaned back slightly, tension draining from his shoulders. This was what clarity felt like, he told himself. This was what resolution sounded like. He did not realize he had stopped listening for interruption. A man who had been pacing all afternoon finally sat down. He folded his hands on the table and kept them. His legs stopped bouncing. His breathing slowed. The decision, whatever it was, had freed him from motion. Outside, the sky darkened by another shade. Lights came on one by one along the perimeter. Not because night had fully arrived, but because procedure said they should. Each light flickered briefly before stabilizing, casting clean circles onto the ground. The circles did not overlap. A vehicle moved into position it had not occupied earlier in the day. The driver shut off the engine and remained inside, hands on the wheel, waiting for further instruction that would not come. The engine ticked as it cooled, metal contracting with faint pops. Those sounds blended easily into. Inside, the folder was carried from one room to another and set down in a new place on a new table. It was oriented precisely, aligned with the table's edge. The man who placed it there adjusted it twice to get it right. He did not open it. A conversation started nearby about something unrelated. A meal, a delay in supply, a rumor from another sector. The words came easily now, no longer strained. Laughter even surfaced, low and brief, then faded. The sense of waiting changed shape. It was no longer about whether something would happen. It was about when. At a side desk, a man tore a page from his notebook, crumpled it, and threw it into a bin. He opened to a fresh page and wrote the same heading again, cleaner this time. Whatever doubt had been scratched beneath the old heading was gone. He did not remember what he had written there. A watch alarm chirped softly somewhere in the building. Not an alert, just a reminder. It was silenced almost immediately. The sound cut off mid-beep. The man wearing the watch did not look embarrassed. The reminder had served its purpose. Across the yard, the new sentry shifted his stance, settling in. He scanned the horizon with the casual thoroughness of someone who expected nothing to change. The distance remained quiet. The flags did not move. The wind did not return. Inside, a final mark was made on a logbook, a straight line, drawn carefully, separating what came before from what would come after. The man closed the book and slid it into a drawer. The drawer clicked shut. No one reacted to the sound. Nothing dramatic had occurred. Nothing violent. Nothing that would be remembered as the moment itself, but the sequence had completed. The smallest step that could not be taken back had been taken, and from that point forward, everything else would only follow. The building grew quiet in a way that felt intentional, not empty, not asleep, quiet like a held posture, muscles engaged, waiting for the signal to release. Footsteps became rare. When they did occur, they sounded careful, as if the floor itself might object to being disturbed. Doors stayed closed. Conversations thinned to murmurs, and then to nothing at all. Even the radios seemed to lower their voices, the hiss smoothing into a constant, almost soothing presence. The lights remained on. They always did at this hour. Nothing unusual about it. Still, the way the light fell now felt different, more deliberate, sharper at the edges. Shadows no longer wandered. They settled where they were and stayed. In one room, a man stood alone at a window. He had been there before, earlier in the day, when the glass had still fogged under his breath. Now the window was clear. The outside had darkened enough that the glass reflected him faintly, a pale outline superimposed over the yard beyond. For a moment, he couldn't tell which image he was meant to watch. Below, the yard was almost empty. Equipment sat exactly where it had been placed, each piece squared, aligned, waiting. A vehicle idled with its lights off, engine cold now, presence marked only by its shape against the ground. The sentry stood at his post, unmoving, rifle held in the same relaxed grip he'd practiced countless times. Nothing demanded attention. That was the unsettling part. Inside, a clock ticked. Not the taped clock from earlier. Another one. Deeper in the building, its sound carried through vents and walls. A steady, patient beat. It did not hurry. It did not hesitate. Each second arrived and departed without emphasis. Tick, tick. A man at a desk reached for his pen, then stopped. He looked at the paper in front of him. A form half-filled, a sentence unfinished. He knew how it was meant to end. He had known all day. Still, he let the pen hover, suspended just above the page, as if the distance of a few millimeters still contained possibility. After a moment, he set the pen down without writing. He leaned back and exhaled, long and slow, the kind of breath taken after effort rather than before it. In the communications room, the operator adjusted his headphones and then, after a second's thought, removed them entirely. He set them neatly on the desk, coils straightened, wires aligned. He did not power down the radio. He simply stopped listening for change. A chair creaked somewhere. A boot scraped softly as a man shifted his stance. The sounds echoed farther than they should have, each small noise standing out against the calm. A door at the far end of the corridor opened. Light spilled briefly into the hallway, then narrowed as the door was pulled almost, but not quite, shut. Voices murmured inside the room beyond it, indistinct, unimportant. The door remained ajar by a a compromise between openness and closure. No one went in. No one called out. The folder lay untouched on the table where it had been placed earlier. Its edges were perfectly aligned with the grain of the wood. A single hand rested nearby, fingers splayed, not touching it. The hand stayed there longer than necessary. Outside, the sky continued its gradual shift, deepening from gray to something heavier, more absolute. No stars appeared yet, no moon, just a broad, waiting dark that seemed to press downward without actually moving. The sentry blinked. He adjusted his grip, rolled his shoulders once, then returned to stillness. Somewhere in the distance, something metallic knocked lightly against something else. Wind, perhaps, or cooling metal. The sound repeated once, then stopped. No alarms sounded, no horns, no sirens. A man in a side room checked his watch and nodded to himself. He did not announce the time. He did not record it. The moment passed unmarked except in his expression, which tightened slightly, then relaxed. Another man folded his jacket and set it over the back of a chair, smoothing the fabric twice. He sat down and placed his hands on his knees, posture straight, as if expecting instruction that would never arrive in words. In the yard, a light flickered and stabilized. In the corridor, a switch was flipped back to its neutral position, returning a panel to its default state. The man who did it paused afterward, listening to the hum settle, then walked away. The building, satisfied, held its breath. Somewhere far beyond the perimeter, far enough that no one inside could hear it, forces were aligning with quiet inevitability. Distances closed that did not feel like distances anymore. Movements occurred without friction, without resistance, without pause. Inside, no one spoke of it. They spoke of nothing at all. The final routine checks were performed by habit alone. A latch tested, a light confirmed, a note placed in a tray and squared with its edge. Each action was small, precise, and unremarkable. Together, they formed a complete sequence. The man at the window straightened and stepped back. He did not look again. He did not need to. In the communications room, the radio hiss softened, as if something on the other end had adjusted its own volume in response. The operator noticed, frowned briefly, then dismissed it. The sound had done that. The clock ticked on. Tick, tick. No one moved to stop it. No one moved at all. The moment stretched, thin as wire, holding everything in place. And just before it could break, time stopped being something anyone noticed.